Thank you, Yvonne.
Thank you, Ruby, and thank you, OASPA, for hosting this webinar for us. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers today, but I also want to thank you all the participants. We had almost 300 people registering for this webinar from over 48 countries. That makes us really, really happy. From 220 different organizations, 1/3 from publishers, 1/3 from academic libraries. As Ruby said, the slides and the recording will be available from the OASPA site. And I want to thank the 2022 webinar series sponsors from OASPA. OASPA relies on the support of its members, sponsors and conference delegates to enable it to carry out all the work it does. So thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. The panelists of today, the first speakers are from the Beilstein-Institut, Wendy, Patterson and Lange. Then the next speaker is Matt Day from Cambridge University Press. Then we'll have Verbeek. He has 2 talks, but the same amount of time. He's from our tech partner, but also from the organization, the tech company Appetence, who helps publishers to connect to the switchboard. Then the third publisher speakers are from eLife. It's Fred Atherden and Jaman, and then Yvonne will come again. I also have a couple of slides to kick us off. Let me double check if I've not forgotten anything. Yes, please put all your questions in the Q&A. We also have a chat, but the questions we're saving till the end. I will keep track together with Bernie, who's here from OASPA. And if we don't have enough time to answer all the questions today, we will distribute them afterwards in an overview in a spreadsheet. So please put your questions in the Q&A. Then I think, Ruby, I can go on with my own brief introduction. Right. I think you all know who I am. Just quickly, for those who are new, but it will be really about the publishers today, but I want to take a couple of minutes. Open access is opening research up to the world. Academics, institutions, funders, and publishers are committed to ensuring that research is accessible to all. But at the same time, funders, institutions are expanding their requirements and their policies, and business models become increasingly complex and diverse. So how do the 3 main stakeholder groups for the OA Switchboard, the publishers, the institutions, consortia, and the research funders, navigate the OA research and publishing maze? The OA Switchboard aims to provide an answer. It's a not-for-profit, a mission-driven, community-led initiative designed to simplify the sharing of information between the stakeholders. And information is actually metadata. It's all about metadata. I'm going to make that point a couple of times, the importance of PIDs, and also that besides a community and a mission-driven initiative, the Switchboard also provides a very practical tool. It's rather simple. This is it. It's a message hub. And if we talk about a message, we mean a set of metadata relating to a publication. And what the Switchboard enables is for stakeholder 1 to communicate, to exchange information with stakeholder 2. And if the use case, if it's relevant, stakeholder 2 can also respond to the message. And that is it. I'm not going to go through this slide, but if you want to hear more, if you want to hear about previous webinars, a quick reference card, we have a 3-minute video. There's lots of information on the resources section on our website. And I also invite everybody to sign up to our mailing list so that you don't miss out on any future events or any news that we have to share. Also, our participants page has been recently updated. You can find details on who's live, who has an account, and also statistics on how many messages and how many participants. So that's all available. Also some use cases, and that will be a growing library of use cases to share with you. Back to the webinar. Today is all about how to. That is really the theme for today. And I'm really pleased that the 3 publisher speakers are going to talk about this, and Ivo about how generally we're helping publishers and what he sees as trends and developments. Maybe back up. This is a known slide maybe to some of you, but I think it doesn't hurt to go over. There's 3 ways technically how publishers can connect to the switchboard. The first one is manually. There's very few people doing that. You can imagine why, but it is possible. So you can manually use our user interface to enter the metadata and send P1 messages. Option 2 is what the original idea of the switchboard was all about, integration with the API. And we have speakers today talking about that, and I'm really pleased that this is in practice now as well, and we can hear about best practices and first experiences there. Most publishers live on Switchboard use option 3, a so-called custom connector. And Ivo is going to talk about that in more detail. This is my last slide. I do want to share it because it gives a little bit of an insight in the complexity, but also I'm going to make the point again about the PIDs, the persistent identifiers. None of this would be possible. This is probably our biggest lesson from 2021, that you do need persistent identifiers to solve real problems. And I'm really proud that yesterday we made an announcement together with Orchid that we're going to work together in leveraging the authoritative affiliation data from authors' records in authors' Orchid profiles. Ivo will also talk about that. And then also the multiple partner systems. So I want to mention some names. A couple of weeks ago, you might have seen an announcement from us automating the interaction with CCC. Whether a publisher works with CCC, Aptara, or Atherden, Silverchair, Editorial Manager, ScholarOne, I can name them all, but that is what we mean with the multiple partner systems that publishers use. And also on the funder and the institutional side, whether it's Chronosub, OAble, Consortium Manager, JISC Monitor, you name it, the switchboard's idea is that we connect and complement everything that's out there. And my last message before I hand over to Wendy and Christian is that I want to make one thing super, super clear, because we often get questions about it. The custom connector that we will talk about today as well is not part of the switchboard. It sits somewhere in between the publisher and the switchboard, but it's really one of the ways in which publishers find a technical solution to connect to the switchboard, and it's not part of the actual switchboard. So you can see we get very much into the how-to, maybe even too technical for some of you, but feel free to drop questions in the Q&A and we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. And I'm going to stop sharing and introduce to you Wendy Patterson and Christian Lange from Beilstein-Institut.
Great, thanks Yvonne. Hi everyone, so I'm Wendy, I'm here with Christian and we're from the Beilstein-Institut. And our talk today will happen in two parts. I'm going to start with a bit of background and discuss our aims and our reasons for deciding to join Open Access Switchboard. Christian's going to follow up with the details you want to hear, which is how we did it. And I'm also going to discuss briefly the benefits specifically for Diamond open access journals. That is open access journals who do not charge APCs to anyone. So not to authors, societies, libraries, funders, etc. And from this terrific study here, commissioned by Coalition S, we know one thing that for sure, that Diamond open access journals were many. So there are around 29,000 such journals, probably even more. It's hard to count because our biggest challenge is visibility. So we are individually small journals, lots of small journals. We don't usually make a fuss. We don't ask for much because, well, we don't need much. We typically have very low running costs or are even self-sustaining, such as our case, which is why most librarians and funders don't realize how much we publish collectively per year for their scholars. So although we've been around for decades, yeah? So what we need, or what we've needed for a long time, is a way to communicate directly with and inform libraries, funders, or anyone who's listening that we have not only published work for their scholars open access, but I want them to know that we did this at no cost to them or reduction to their budgets. Yeah. And so we intend to do this through the so-called P1 messages sent from Open Access Switchboard. So next slide, please. This is a notification posted that we have published this article open access, and it will include this important metadata so that the receiver of this notification will understand that this article was published by a Diamond open access journal. And another reason why we are doing this is for inclusivity. So this may sound a little bit pessimistic, but stay with me here. But when I first heard about the Open Access Switchboard project, my initial reaction was, oh no, not another important piece of infrastructure that Diamond OA journals are just going to be left out of. We found out this is actually not the case. And we're involved in this because we do not want to be left out of these important discussions about infrastructure in scholarly publishing. And in order, we're here to remain included in such discussions, and also to seek other ways this could benefit Diamond open access journals. And another reason why we decided to go ahead and participate with this initiative is that the barrier to entry was quite low. So what that means is that it must be easy for everyone involved. This is especially important for Diamond open access journals, as we have to be careful about how we invest our time and thus money and limited resources, right? But the good news is that it's particularly easy for us because only these P1 messages are relevant for Diamond open access. And since we're already accustomed to sending this similar metadata to Crossref, we were actually only missing one important link, which is the ROR identifiers, which are very important. But we had already planned to implement ROR. And the good news is this project actually motivated us to move the ROR identifiers up in our production and up in our priority. And yeah, just as a side note, ROR was also not so difficult as we thought. So go for it if you're considering it. It was also important for us that the barrier for our authors was low as well. We don't want to further burden them. They don't have the time or patience or energy, as you all know, to fill in yet another form in a publishing system. So this was also important for us that it's easy for them. And the final reason I was interested in this initiative, or that we are, is that I see further ways that Open Access Switchboard could potentially contribute to the support of Diamond open access journals. So we've had some initial just discussions and brainstorming about maybe a potential additional message that could be sent from, for example, a library or librarian who would like to contact a Diamond open access journal to indicate that they would like to support this journal in some way. So this is currently a barrier. Yeah. I know many librarians who wish to support Diamond open access, but they don't know how to identify good journals that their researchers are actively using. This is very important. Yeah. But enough of the background. What you want to know today is the how. So let's get back to the simple technical implementation, the how. And my colleague Christian will now show you how we did this. I'll hand over to him, and I'll be around later if you have any questions about this motivation for Diamond open access journals. Over to you, Christian.
All right, video. Hi, thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Yvonne. Yeah, my name is Christian. I was responsible for the integration of Open Access Switchboard into the workflow of our journals, and I'd like to give you a short outline of this project with some practical considerations and a few words and a few screenshots about how we actually did it. So as Wendy mentioned, the most important issue is to obtain the raw IDs, which serve as recipient addresses in Open Access Switchboard. Another consideration was that we didn't want to involve the authors, as Wendy mentioned, so that to save them from hassle with third-party APIs during submission, and to save them from worries about what raw IDs actually are. in our workflow, we obtain the raw IDs during layout. We use the data from the manuscripts or version of records, so that we as publishers have no uncertainties regarding any affiliations that might be stored as well in the system user database and something like that. And we also decided to send one P1 message for each obtained raw ID for each manuscript, instead of using the auto CC functionality, which is also offered by Open Access Switchboard. The workflow of our journal is completely based on XML. This is very handy here. All affiliations are kept separate from the authors in a list of affiliation elements, and they're just linked to the author elements, as you can see here. And this means that regardless of the number of authors and regardless of the number of affiliations that are connected to the authors, we can or need to query each affiliation only one time, or yes, to the raw REST API. And yeah, we retrieve from the raw REST API the raw ID of the institution name and the country, and we store these data again as part of the affiliation with no direct connection to the authors. We use the affiliation search option of the raw REST API. An example is given here in orange. And the response to this query is a list of raw IDs with a matching score from 0 to 1. And the API also sets a chosen flag to the raw IDs with true or false to indicate which institution seems the matching one to the affiliation query sent to the API. And a list of these results or of our results with a score greater than 0.8, but at most 5 results is taken from this query and presented to the editorial staff for selection during layout. And there's also the option to set no institution in the workflow when no raw ID was found. That's what it actually looks like in our publishing system. In the very beginning, we have a table which is almost empty except for all affiliations that are given in the manuscript. And then the editorial staff can click edit here. There's this example of the Université Paris-Cité. And this moves forward to the next window of the actually raw query. Again, here the affiliation from the manuscript is given in full with a query button. And there's also the option of a free text search. And when we click query here, the mentioned table is presented, 5 results, all with a score greater than 0.8. And in the first line, there's also the chosen flag set true. This means that the raw API suggests this institution as the correct one for this affiliation. And the editorial staff can then select one of these institutions here, or if nothing is found, set no institution. And once this is completed for all affiliations, the table has been filled now with the affiliations from the manuscript. Again, the institution name from the raw API, the country from the raw API. There are hyperlinks to the raw ID and ISNI, which I didn't mention here. And there's also one affiliation for which no raw ID was found, and the set no institution was selected. And this in turn means that the required flag here was set to no. So there will be a final validation whether all queries were carried out during the layout, and this required flag no indicates that the query was not forgotten, but that no raw ID was found. And now that we have all raw IDs, we can finally send the P1 JSON messages to the API of Open Access Switchboard. I will just present you 2 important parts of these messages. The first one is the header of the message here. And you can see in the address to field, there is the raw ID, which we change for all raw IDs found for the manuscript. And the second part is the communication of our Diamond open access status, and we do this by setting a value of 0 here to article processing charges and total article charges. So this is what the messages look like, or parts of the messages look like then. And to see that this really works and works very well, I will have 2 final screenshots from the test systems currently. This is the response of the API to the submission of one such message. You see a status 200 OK from the server, and there is a short success note as well. And the second screenshot is from the dashboard of Open Access Switchboard, where you can see that the messages are accordingly displayed in an overview table. And this is at the moment technically the only way to oversee the fate of the messages after submission. And yeah, it works very well. And we are looking forward to going live with this in the coming weeks. And with that, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you, OASPA, for hosting this webinar. Thank you, Yvonne and Ivo, for this great collaboration. And thank you, audience, for your attention.
That is fantastic, Christian and Wendy, and thank you for giving us a fantastic demonstration to see ROR implemented in the editorial workflow without a burden on the author. It's really fantastic to see that example, and also to see a true API integration. As I said in my introduction, API integration is one of the ways in which a publisher can connect to the switchboard, and our next speaker, Matthew Day from Cambridge University Press, is going to present another scenario for connecting to the switchboard. Floor is yours, Matt.
Great, thank you, Yvonne. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, which I hope you can all see now. Great, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we're using the switchboard, and also why, and some of it like the guiding principles that we're using, that are driving us really, and really why we're kind of very excited about this project and how we think it can really make our lives easier and lots of other lives easier. Sorry, just let me click forward. So the essential feature about CEP's journal publishing business is that we're just going fully open research. So we're transitioning from a purely subscription-based model, a readership model, into a publishing model. And that's quite tricky for us because we're kind of medium-sized publisher, so about 20,000 research articles a year we publish in about 400 journals, and probably less than half of those journals we own and control, so more than half are owned by societies that we publish on behalf of. So it's a very complex mix of kind of stakeholders, if you like, in the journals business. And we really need to be getting all of those journals to be publishing the research as open access. And we think that the vast majority, so at least 75%, will be published under this new breed of transformative agreements, as we're calling them at the moment, but where we have arrangements with the institutes to publish their output as open access. So although in the past good metadata and good reporting has always been important, it's completely essential for this open access transformation. So every part of our business is affected by this move to open research and open access. So this slide shows kind of in as simple as form as I could imagine it, really the scale of the challenge. So we have multiple systems. The top row in turquoise, I guess. We've got submission systems, and we use multiple different submission systems. I think there's at least 6, including some journals are not on a submission system at all. They're just email based. So when authors submit to a journal, mostly they're using a web interface that collects information, but in some cases it's just an email. And articles go through the editorial process, and then they move into our production systems. And then they move to like the final stage where we're gathering the content, preparing it for publishing to the world. So in the old world, all of those processes happened, and then we would publish content to the world. And because the model was based around selling readership, we needed to report readership to customers. But now the model is becoming about publishing. We have to report on publishing to our customers rather than readership. And so open access has created many challenges around all of the metadata and information and processes around open access publishing, and also the reporting aspects. So we've needed to tap into many different systems, some of which are ours, many of which are third-party systems. Lots of spaghetti, if you like, and we've had to tap into it at many different places to rebuild an OA workflow, or to create an OA publishing workflow. And now we've got to pull information out of those different places in order to serve our reporting needs. And one of the challenges is that everything is still evolving, everything's still changing, right? So the types of agreements that the transformative agreements that we're conceiving and discussing and signing with our customers, libraries or consortia of libraries, for example, they're still changing. The workflows are changing in every respect. So, for example, it's still a bit clunky. It's still, well, quite clunky for authors to go through this process and make the right decisions and know that they're doing the right thing and that everything's going to work for them in the way they need. That's still evolving. We've got new requirements coming from customers and funders and other stakeholders. The underlying metadata standards are continuing to develop, and we've got new kind of use cases, new end uses, new purposes, if you like, for what people want to do, and how they want to achieve it, new tools, new services, and indeed new organizations, new kind of players are constantly arising. So there's a lot going on, and it's difficult to build already what we know we need now, and it's also hard to know really what are we building for in the future. So this is this makes it, I don't want to sound kind of like down on this, it makes it extremely exciting and intellectually challenging, but it is difficult. So with the scale of that challenge, if you like, I think some of our principles are that really publishing is becoming complicated at the moment. It's becoming complicated for us as a publisher. It's becoming complicated for our customers, libraries. Everybody's lives becoming more complicated. And we need that process of increased complication to reverse and things to becoming much more simple again, more efficient, more cost effective. It's not cost effective at the moment. You know, we really need things to be simpler so that it becomes more cost effective. And we all just the very nature of the many-to-many problem, if you like, many publishers, many stakeholders, libraries, funders, other organizations that need information about what's being published. That many-to-many relationship needs to be managed in a way that it's as simple as possible for us. So that kind of all sets us up for being very receptive to the idea of a shared community-governed infrastructure like the Open Access Switchboard, which we think will benefit everyone. It's in our interest that we're all doing something in a similar way to similar standards, and that we all have some ownership and control over this infrastructure because we're all increasingly dependent on it. So the Open Access Switchboard really does tick all of those boxes, I think, for us. So this is my final slide. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I think I want to show just how flexible the switchboard is and how it's enabled an organization like Cambridge University Press, which was already really putting a lot of resources into the rebuilding ourselves for open access publishing, and a lot of complexity, a lot of systems that you cannot make a tweak easily somewhere. Either it's difficult to do, or it's going to have a knock-on effect somewhere else in the system and cause problems. So so what we originally did with the switchboard is stage one here, quick and simple. We got Evo's team built us a custom connector that was very quick, very cheap, low cost. We send them something we already have, our JAX XML so the full text for our journal articles, and the custom connector creates P messages, so the public metadata about the published articles, and sends it out to the customers. So that was incredibly easy to do, and it was definitely worth doing. But it was a promising step forward, if you like. It wasn't particularly meaningful in its own right, but it's a first step on an important journey for us. And essentially what it means is that the data that institutes are getting through the switchboard from the P messages that we're sending through this custom connector won't be the same in all cases as the reports we're already sending them. But that's okay. That's, this is the first step. So what we're doing now is the second step, which is incrementally improving this. So we want to improve our integration with the switchboard while also having a lot of background workflow and systems development, and not try to get one bogged down on the other, but just make incremental steps forward. So what we're doing is we are working to send more metadata, the institute IDs, the RAWs that we've already heard about from Wendy and Christian. We want to be able to move away from the custom connector to a direct API connection. And we want to not just be sending public metadata, but to use the other parts of the switchboard, the entitlement messages, the e-messages, as they call them, the negotiation with institutes saying, hey, we're about to publish an article from one of your authors. Are you happy for it to go under a deal, or are you happy for it to pay for an APC, or whatever the negotiation has to be? So at that point, when we've got incrementally, we will have incremental benefits, and significant benefits will be realized just through stage 2. But ultimately, we really want stage 3, which is that the switchboard is our primary reporting tool. And we encourage all of our customers to use it. And I guess for a while, there will be customers that aren't using it, and we will have to use our old systems. But essentially, the switchboard will be a fully functioning industry standard, and that will be our preferred tool. So I think it's fantastic that the switchboard's been designed and built in a way that allows us to take this iterative approach and to do what we can do now, and to allow us to just incrementally improve our relationship. So that's how we're approaching the switchboard at Cambridge University Press. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. That's great. So indeed, we would like to, or I would like to show. So I would like to show what that looks like, the stage 1 that Matt mentioned. I think it's clear from Matt's talk. Oh, sorry, start my video. That how important metadata is in the transformation to open access, and also the reporting functionality that's part of the switchboard functionality. So my name is Yvonne Verbeek. So I've been the project manager for several projects where we implement this so-called custom connector to send P1, the publication notification messages, to the switchboard. And today I have a couple of slides for more or less the standard plan of approach that we take in that kind of projects. So what's the scope of such a project? We have indeed data sources, different data sources that are combined in what we call a custom connector. And that custom connector means that you won't integrate directly to the switchboard API, such as Beilstein did, but there's a little piece of software in between called that custom connector. It combines the data from the various sources, it composes the P1, and then it sends it to the API. So what are those 3 data sources that we typically see in a phase 1? First of all, that's JETS XML. So this is JETS XML that typically comes from a content distribution system, and some publishers have a proprietary system like Kamruj. Others have standard software like Silverchair, Ingenta, Atherden. These type of softwares, they are well equipped to set up JETS XML feeds to different systems such as Crossref, of course, PubMed, that kind of deposit. So you simply add another target drop folder, which we provide the access details to, and that's it. That's not rocket science to set up a JETS feed. Then also we ask a deal, what we call a deal sheet. It's basically an Excel sheet that has rows, and each row tells us which institution you have a deal with. And yes, then we need that persistent identifier for that institution. That can be a Ringgold ID, a ROR ID, even a mail domain will work in many cases. And there is some limited deal information there as well. So we provide a template. You fill in the template, you put it in the drop folder. If you have an update, you overwrite it in the drop folder, and that's basically it. And the last source is journal master data. So again, that's an Excel sheet with which journals do you have, and some basic metadata. So these three sources, they are all going into that custom connector. So what does that project look like? Well, in the first step, we set up that JETS XML feed, or typically we first get some samples. Then we have a meeting where we discuss the samples. We provide the template. We discuss exactly what we need. There are probably some questions about the JETS XML. So that's typically one meeting. Then we do the actual development. And for us, this is between 8 and 16 hours of development. And that's it. And then we have the custom connector ready. So it's customized for your data. And at the other end, it's sending out standard P1 messages. So in 3 to 4 weeks lead time, we are at the point where we can have this go live session. And that's, to be exact, this is only for the go live for publication and notification messages. And then we can take it further in a phase 2, a phase 3. I guess that's exactly where we are going to bridge to Fred and Cam from eLife, because they're doing a little bit more than these P1 messages. So I'll let them speak, and then I'll come back.
Hello. Should be sharing my screen now. Hopefully you can all see it. So thank you to everyone for letting us join here. I'm here with my colleague Cam to talk about eLife's involvement with the OA Switchboard and why we're excited about this initiative. By way of a short introduction, for the benefit of those of you who are unfamiliar with eLife, it's a non-profit, mission-driven organization created by funders and led by researchers. And there's our mission statement there on the slide, which I'll spare reading out for you all. eLife operates in 3 key areas. We review selected preprints in all areas of biology and medicine, while exploring new ways to improve on how research is assessed and published. We've been publishing gold OA journal articles for the past 10 years within a single journal. In addition to that, eLife invests in open source technology innovation to modernize the infrastructure for science publishing and improve online tools for sharing, using, and interacting with new results. And finally, eLife is committed to working with the worldwide research community to promote responsible behaviors in research. And so we believe that the OA Switchboard initiative has beneficial implications for all of those areas. As a result, we've been a sponsor of the initiative since 2020, and in late 2021, we agreed to be a participant on the Switchboard as a publisher via the custom connector that Ivo's just discussed. So we thought we'd give you a timeline detailing our perspective in connecting to the Switchboard as a participant. So in mid-October of 2021, we were given access details for the OA Switchboard user interface and the custom connector sandbox environment. And in late October, the vendors of our submission system, eJournal Press, set up the feed to OAS. They provide all of the metadata collected at submission for accepted articles, which is a subset of the data that's available at final publication. So, for example, it doesn't always include complete affiliation or funding information, but it does include ROR IDs and funder IDs where available. In early November, we set up a feed to provide OA Switchboard with the JATS XML for our published articles on a daily basis. And this was very simple to do because we were simply sending the files to an SFTP site. And we already do this for various other downstream services, as I'm sure many other organizations and publishers do. Then in mid-November, it became clear that we needed to use data from our submission system in order to identify the lead corresponding author for our articles. It's quite common in the disciplines that eLife operates in for there to be numerous corresponding authors for a single article. I'm sure this is also common in many other areas of research as well. But in our published data, we don't capture the concept of a lead corresponding author. We just identify who the corresponding authors are. Although we do use this concept at submission. And as an aside, I'd be interested in sort of other organizations' approaches on this topic, what ways you capture that information if you do. And I know it's something that organizations like JATS for R have and will be looking at. The institution or the funder for the lead corresponding author would be the organization that we primarily want to send the P1 messages to within the switchboard. So that's why we sort of wanted to make that refinement. And since submission is typically, although not always, made by this lead corresponding author, it made sense to use the data from our submission system rather than the published JATS XML to make that distinction. And so at this point in the sandbox test environment, we had all of the data flowing into the system. So it was just a matter of waiting for the timings to align. Our typical acceptance to publication times hover around 20 days or so. So we had to wait for approximately that length of time before seeing real messages appear within the sandbox environment. And then in sort of early to mid-December, when we did see those messages, we went live. And then finally we made a further refinement. At the end of January, we started adding ROR IDs for affiliations within our published article XML. So it's nice to see these flowing through the system as well. As mentioned by some of the other speakers, we leverage ROR's REST API in our production process, and we use validation tools such as Schematron, as well as other manual checks to introduce ROR IDs and ensure that the correctness of the match between the affiliation and the ROR ID itself. So this slide just shows a small screenshot of some of the information that's available in the user interface. You can see there some funders for a certain article and their ROR IDs. There's functionality within the user interface that permits you to download the data for all of the messages that have been sent in Excel or JSON format, so that makes it much easier to report on and integrate with other reports. And most of the messages in the system at the moment for us are P1 messages, which are messages sent from eLife to other organizations, as others have sort of mentioned. But we have seen some P2 messages as well, which are some responses back from organizations to us. And so with that, I'll pass over to Cam, who will discuss our possible next steps.
Thank you, Fred. So hopefully that was insightful for many of you. I don't really have a lot to add beyond Fred, but just to touch on what could come up next for us as a participant. So as Fred's mentioned, we've got P messages coming through the switchboard. In the future, we'll be exploring the possibility of integrating and having e-messages come through. It's a bit more of a complex area, so it requires a bit more work. So something for the future. And we've also got an agreement with Max Planck their central billing for various all their papers. Part of the existing workflow is quite manual, where we require validation from them. Now we're hoping when we do look at the e-messages and integrating that, there's a possibility to automate some of that and get rid of that manual intervention and automate the workflow to be a bit more efficient for all parties involved. And with the actual switchboard itself, now the more participants there are, the more messages, more complete messages contained within the switchboard. So we'll look at ways to try and promote the OA switchboard to get as many participants, institutes on board, so there are more messages going through the switchboard, which then are more relevant to report on. And yeah, that's all we've got to say. We've got, I just want to thank Yvonne, Ivo, for helping us go live really at the end of last year. So it's brilliant.
Okay, thanks, Fred and Cam. So I think your presentation shows like the big variety of systems that are interacting with the switchboard, with or without a custom connector, and also the step-by-step approach. So that's good. So let me share my screen again. So yeah, I want to my second part of the talk is about publishers integration with the switchboard, about generic reverse custom connectors, and also about private data store and some workflows that are happening in that private data store. So just a quick introduction. So my name, you already know that Ivo Verbeek. So we help publishers integrate with the switchboard. But our development center in Ukraine from ELITEX is also the tech partner for switchboard itself. So that's why we also support parties like Beilstein when they want to integrate with the API. But we also help other publishers to integrate with the custom connector approach. So this is where that fits in. We have the publishers that connect to the switchboard by sending messages, and that custom connector with or without a private data store, it's there at that arrow. We help in composing the P1 messages so that you won't have to connect to the API yet. You can park that for later. That's what the custom connector will do. So this is the visual that I've already shown. So it's taking data from different sources like editorial systems, version of records, content distribution systems. It's taking deal information, publication level financial information, journal master data, and sometimes other publisher specific sources. It's receiving all that data, then we generate the events and apply the business rules. So these business rules, they are always customer specific. That's why it's a custom connector. And then we compose the P1 or the E1 or both, and we send these messages to the switchboard API. Then at some point when there's data coming from different systems that need to be combined, so for example, if the publication level financial information is coming from one system and it needs to be combined with the version of records, which is a JETS XML feed, then we also need a persistent data store, and that's where the private data store comes in. So the private data store is nothing more than a database that persistently stores that data for the custom connector. So what systems do we see in this landscape? Well, first of all, it's the custom systems. So Many publishers have custom built systems, either in editorial or financial or content distribution. But for editorial systems, we've connected to all the major editorial systems, Editorial Manager, Scroll1, EGP. We have also done a plugin for OGS, which exports the data to a custom connector. Then for financial transactions, of course, rights link from CCC and agreement or agreement manager. Also the BPS, so that's the commerce module from EGP. But also there are publishers who basically have their transactions and they provide it in an Excel sheet. That's still, it's also happening in this landscape. And on the content distribution, well, I've already touched that in my previous talk. So why is this? There's more. What type of business rules are happening there? Well, I want to touch on one of them, which is pretty essential, and also Christian has done a great introduction. It's the enrichment of persistent identifiers, because the reality is that some publishers have these persistent identifiers already implemented throughout their workflow, but others don't, and they need a solution for that. And that's a very simple workflow that we have in the custom connector. It's called smart matching. And then always ask us, yeah, well, is that a feature of the custom connector? No, it's really not. It's a feature that's being provided by the switchboard. So the switchboard has a feature called the suggester, the smart matching. But the custom connector is where that happens, because if you want to send a message to the switchboard, you need that ROR ID. And if you don't have it, if the publisher system contains only a text field, then somehow you need to map it from text to the persistent identifier. And at the moment, the smart matching supports three types of persistent identifiers. One is the Ringgold mapping. So that's basically dependent on the institutions providing us their Ringgold ID. So that will only work for institutions that are actually a participant in the switchboard. Then 2 is the ROR affiliation matching. And 3, which is the one that we introduced only very recently. Yesterday there was a press release from Orchid and OA Switchboard that we now also support a lookup of persistent identifiers in the Orchid records. So I have a couple of slides to talk about that. So this, I'm going to go through this quickly because Christian showed a perfect example how you do it like semi-automated. So we do it fully automated, but the essence is the same. Yeah, the ROR API returns scores and matches, and if the score is high enough, we take the ROR ID. So we've done that up until now for over more than 100,000 requests. We found that 50% returns actually a match if we have a score threshold of 90%. So you can play around with that, but that's what we use now for the smart matching feature. And we checked just to get a quick impression, and we believe that over 99% of these matches are actually good. So we also have some false positives. That's unfortunately what happens. So we deal with that through a stop list. So there's also an alternative, which is a human check. Either you do the check yourself, like Beilstein does, or you can also actually outsource that to a mechanism called Mechanical Turk, which is outsourced for outsourcing for that kind of task. And of course, the ultimate scenario is full support for persistent identifiers throughout the publishing workflow. And I think eLife showed what that looks like, from submission to ultimately also having these raw IDs in the JETS XML. That's where you want to be at the end, and then the whole smart matching thing is not needed anymore. The new feature, the Orchid affiliation matching. So let's say there is an Orchid records, there's an Orchid in the published article in the JETS XML. Of course, we can just pull up the Orchid record, and that also contains identifiers. So here's an example of an Orchid record that contains a Ringgold ID, and then also an ISNI that's actually provided by Ringgold, apparently, and other Orchid records contain a ROR ID or other persistent identifiers. So then the only thing we do is still compare the actual text field with the text field in the Orchid record, and if that matches, then we move forward with, in this case, the ISNI, because the ISNI is simple to convert that to a ROR ID, and that is then used to route the message. So we have these three mechanisms, and we're very happy that we now also support the Orchid record lookup as a simple workflow that's happening in the custom connector, but it's a feature of the switchboard. That's for my talk. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But now I'm gonna hand back over to Yvonne.
Thank you, Ivo, and all of the speakers, Wendy, Christian, Matt, Fred, and Cam, and Ivo. I hope that what you take away from this is that there's always a solution, that we have now a lot of experience and use cases and best practices to start small, and that there is potential to do a lot, but that you don't need to go there in one step. So let me answer at least one of the questions I saw in the chat, and that is how small diamond publishers can get involved. And actually the answer is the same for all publishers. You can reach out to me, and what we then normally do is have a phone call, and we talk about your situation, your system landscape, the volume of the articles published, and so on and so forth. And together we come to a plan of approach, what can be the first most simple step to get going. And again, hopefully in this webinar, you have seen that there is, by and large, 3 ways to connect to the switchboard. The simplest one is to connect manually, to enter the metadata by hand. It may not sound appealing, but it is a possibility. And if the volume allows, it might be a way to get started tomorrow. The second is the ultimate full API integration, and it was wonderful to see the Diamond Initiative Beilstein-Institut show how they've done that. And as Ivo said, that is sort of what most people want to move towards. Matt from CUP also mentioned it. What they are doing with option 3, the custom connectors, are intermediate steps to move towards full integration in this changing landscape. So how to get involved is just reach out to me. I'm going to now pull up some slides for the Q&A, obviously, but also with my contact details. Let me do that first. So feel free to send me an email and get involved in the conversation. Let's see if there's more questions in the Q&A. Otherwise, I have some final remarks to wrap it up. Catriona asks, do you think it would be possible to use the smart matching function of the custom connector to assign ROR retrospectively to authors of previous published papers? Absolutely. I think we're already talking to some parties to do that. Ivo, do you want to say a bit more about it without revealing names? But the use case, maybe I think you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, of course. I think that's that's definitely doable. In the sense that, well, I think Beilstein already shows that you can do it for as part of the workflow. But that can also go back. That the only question is, do you want to then connect to the ROR API or to the smart matching feature of the switchboard? That's the only question. But yes, it's doable.
Thanks, Ivo. And to add to that, what we have at the table with various publishers is that this will be giving you as a publisher a wealth of management information. If you're thinking about business models or pricing models, or if you're considering which institutions you do want to approach or do not want to approach to make certain deals with, having this assigned to already published articles, say for the whole corpus of 2021, will give you a good opportunity to analyze your own publications in a way that you probably weren't able to do before. So we have publishers who are thinking about that and talking about that as well. Catriona also had a question about how many publishers have done the full API connection. Ivo, correct me, Beilstein is the first, if I'm not mistaken, and the next one is around the corner, but that will be 2 out of 16. If that second one goes live, we have 16 publishers live, 2 of which have connected through API. Correct, Ivo?
Absolutely. And I think there are 2 others that are in development.
Great. So again, I think this illustrates that there are various ways to get there to the ideal, to full automation, and also it's no problem whatsoever to take intermediate steps to get there. I think I've made this point before in other webinars, also what Ivo showed about the smart matching. We now have 3 flavors, and I think there is no what is the English word? The perfect solution. It is a matter of combining and finding different ways, different approaches to complete your metadata with PIDs, persistent identifiers. That is what we all want, but there is not one perfect solution, and that is fine. I hope we reassure you there's things to gain by taking small steps, and it will bring results step by step. Okay, one more question. Adoption is now key. Absolutely, Catriona. Please help us, all of you. It was mentioned, I think, by Cam. Thank you for that, Cam, as a very, very early supporter. Maybe something now for me to add about the indeed what this is, the trust, the collaboration, and the efficiency. The switchboard is a mission-driven initiative, but it also provides this practical tool. And as was mentioned already, it will work best if as many connections as possible are being made, and that means as many publishers and as many institutions connect. It will also work if that's not the case. Let that be clear. You've heard that hopefully from the stories and the presentations. People experience already improvement to a current situation if they start working with the switchboard. But it is the whole idea that if a lot of parties connect, the service gets better, you get more standardized data, more efficiency, and also not unimportantly, the contribution, the annual support fee that participants pay can be decreased. And that is in our almost in our articles of association. We are not for profit. We're not allowed to make a profit. So if we simply have enough to cover the cost, and that we're running it on a shoestring, we're doing it open source, there will not be bells and whistles. This will be it, an exchange hub for metadata. Then we are committed to even lowering the cost. So yeah, please help us. How does it work? All these publishers who have deals, who have these deal sheets that Ivo mentioned, all these organizations are created in the switchboard, and messages are there waiting for them for the moment they become a participant. And that gives us, without seeing any details, let that be clear, we don't see the details of the publishers nor the details of the researchers, but we now get statistics aggregated and anonymized on which organizations are out there, and we have 2,000 I think now created in the switchboard, and that gives us a good list of institutions to go after. And these webinars are fantastic. We had a lot of uptake following the March webinar as well. But again, spreading the word, all of us together will help. Then there's something in the chat. Let's see. No, that was about the retrospective matching then. Well, maybe to move towards wrapping it up. The trust is really important. We're covering that both in the technical way we've set it up, but also in contracts. I can't stress enough that what we're aiming to do here is provide a safe space for publication metadata, and especially you can imagine if we move into this earlier in the workflow with eligibility inquiries, when the metadata will be about not yet published articles, this becomes really, really important. And I think we've taken every measure we could, technically as well as legally by contracts, to provide a safe space for sharing data between the parties. It's shared infrastructure. That is the first point. The collaboration comes back in everything. The shared governance in our board. We have equal representation by funders, by publishers and institutions. They always have equal voting rights. Also in our client advisory board and all the working groups, everybody is welcome to the table, and together we define the development roadmap, and we set the priorities, and any changes in the protocol and the message structure are being discussed there. What is important? Neutral. We operate and integrate with all stakeholders systems. I think you've heard a lot of names flying by today. I also mentioned it in my introduction. We're neutral, independent. This is all about connecting what is already out there, and the same applies to the PIDs, persistent identifiers. We're not here to define new standards other than the combination of the metadata in the messages. That is, of course, the new standardization. We're agreeing with the community, but we're not introducing new PIDs or any of these things. And I think Matt mentioned it, the efficiency, the administrative burden, but also the human component of maintaining many-to-many relationships. I've talked to publishers who shared with me the challenge of maintaining the names and the contact persons and the email addresses at the different institutions, consortia and funders to communicate with. And this is obviously all taken away by the whole setup. It's intrinsic to what the switchboard is all about, and then decrease the sheer volume of manual information. This is all in the chat. Let's see, I think there's one more in the Q&A. No, that's done. I'm going to pause for a minute, Ruby, and then hand it over